Good day, Premier. So it's nice to do this. I guess it's their third time here.
Yeah.
We've got a lot going on in the energy sector this year. This year in energy seemed to be dominated by the federal government dramatically stepping up its climate change initiatives, such as a clean fuel standard, clean electricity regulations, and most recently venting and flaring ban and emissions cap. All these seem to totally dismiss the realities on the ground in Saskatchewan. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the four that you mentioned, you can add the carbon tax to it as five. And you name me another place in the world that is facing that type of regulatory pressure, an oil-producing region in the world, and there isn't one. You name me another place in the world, an oil-producing region in the world, that has a net zero oil company operating, has companies with a record of 59% reduction in methane emissions over the course of the last 3 years alone. There isn't one. And those are Saskatchewan companies. That's why we were at COP28, was to allow those companies to tell that story to the world and ultimately to their customers. That yes, the oil industry is doing better each and every year, is reducing their emissions to the point of having the only net zero oil company operating in the world, operating right here in Saskatchewan. We were able to augment that story from the government perspective with the fact that if the rest of the world created oil or produced oil like we do in Saskatchewan, emissions would drop 25% overnight. And so now you have that type of an industry with that record that is having five detrimental, problematic, and I would say nefariously positioned regulations applied to them. And that's really why I had made the comments as we returned from COP28 that it's quite obvious to me now the federal government is no longer concerned about reducing emissions in the oil producing sector. They're concerned about ending the oil producing sector in our nation. And so that was not the discussions that I was part of at COP. Even though we saw the non-legal, non-binding agreement by many countries at the end that was signed on to by our environment minister about transitioning away from fossil fuels, there was an acknowledgement that isn't going to happen quickly. And I would just say that particular agreement was signed on to by our federal minister, who has no authority to sign on to any agreement that has anything to do with the development of natural resources in our nation, because that's entirely the purview of the provincial governments. So herein lies the path as we look to the future. And it's unfortunate that we're in an environment where the federal government will repeatedly, 5 times in this space, come out with regulation after regulation after regulation, unconsulted with the provinces. And so what you will see is provinces like Saskatchewan, like Alberta and others, that are going to utilize pieces of legislation that we have existing and maybe coming, like the Saskatchewan First Act, the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Then what you are going to see is, unfortunately, these regulations, because they aren't worked on in any way together or collaboratively, are going to find their way to a court of law. And ultimately, you're going to see many of them find their way to an outcome like Bill C-69 did, or the federal plastics ban. The federal government just simply cannot impose its will into areas of provincial jurisdiction, and it's what they attempt to do time and time again. And it's unfortunate that we are living in a nation where that actually is their primary focus, is how do we employ our lawyers to find a way around the Constitution, the very document that I would say it ties this nation together and makes us proud Canadians first and foremost. So unfortunate, but better times ahead, I think, are coming.
So you just touched on this. The shocking decision by the Supreme Court on Bill C-69 seems to be one of a few wins in this fight. Do you feel that the tide may be turning?
Certainly, I do. And, I even have my views going back to the case that was tried with respect to carbon taxation, where the underlying reasoning behind the federal government winning that case was the fact that they needed to treat all regions of Canada, all provinces, and all Canadians equally. They have now. They're not following that, as we see most recently with the foregoing of carbon tax on home heating fuel. which is impacting Atlantic Canadians predominantly, and very few other Canadians across the nation. And so there's, I think a multitude of challenges and problems with the way our federal government is developing their policy, and blatantly attempting time and time again to intrude into areas of provincial jurisdiction. And so you are going to see these regulations and others, unfortunately, as I say, is they're going to find their way to a court.
Do you feel like you wake up in the morning and you have another federal fight every day?
I don't look for it. I wake up in the morning and think, what can we do that's in the best interest of Saskatchewan people? How can we expand our economy and then use the wealth of that economic prowess, if you will, to build more schools, hospitals, and ensure that we're providing the services that people expect the provincial government to be providing, passing lanes, redoing our highways, twinning highways where we can. That's what I wake up in the morning and get excited about, and doing so through the growth and strength of the Saskatchewan economy, which includes one of the most sustainably producing oil industries in the world. Do I find it discouraging to wake up and realize that yet again the federal government is taking steps into provincial areas of jurisdiction on the development of our natural resources? That's tremendously frustrating, and I think Canadians are starting to see the frustration in it as well, and starting to see that it actually isn't leading us to a place where we can be equally proud as Canadians from coast to coast across this great country. And so I foresee, I'm no fortune teller in particular when it comes to the political wins, but I think we're seeing the last days of the current administration.